It happened 30 years ago, but it still feels like yesterday. Back then, I was in my early 30s, unmarried, living with my retired parents. I worked a modest job at a newspaper company, and my only passion was photography. Life was simple. Work, take photos, develop film, and repeat. But if I had known how one photo shoot would change everything, I would have smashed my camera and never touched it again. I used a Nikon FM2, a reliable manual film camera that cost me 2 months of savings. Paired with a 50mm lens, it delivered crisp, sharp images. Photography wasn't cheap back then. Film rolls and development fees added up quickly. But holding a freshly developed photo in my hands made it all worth it. I like to capture everyday life. Old vendors selling vegetables, bustling morning markets, or the golden glow of sunset on aging apartment buildings. Occasionally, I ventured into the suburbs, seeking more unique and dramatic subjects. One autumn, I heard about an abandoned brick factory on the outskirts of town. People said it was desolate and eerie, perfect for a photo shoot. So, one weekend evening, I packed 2 rolls of Kodak film, hopped on my bike, and set off. The brick factory was far from the city. It took me almost an hour to get there. By the time I arrived, dusk had settled in, and the place was eerily quiet. The only sound was the gentle rustling of grass in the wind. The factory had been abandoned for years. The kiln entrance had partially collapsed, and vines crept over the cracked walls. The whole place felt lifeless, but its decay had a haunting beauty that drew me in. I set up my camera, adjusted the exposure, and took my first shot of the broken kiln. When I went to take the 3rd photo, a sudden chill ran through me as a cold gust of wind swept past my back. My hand shook and I accidentally pressed the shutter too late. Turning around, I saw nothing, just dark grass swaying in the breeze. A few days later, I eagerly picked up my developed photos. Flipping through them, one picture made me freeze. In the 3rd photo, a faint shadow appeared in the bottom left corner. It looked vaguely human, but blurry, almost transparent. At first, I thought it was some kind of light interference or a mistake in the lens. Not wanting to dwell on it, I slipped the photo into a drawer and tried to forget about it. A few weeks later, I went to a different location for another shoot. This time, I chose an abandoned railway bridge. The dry riverbed beneath it and the rusty tracks glowing in the evening sun created a perfect scene. I shot an entire roll of film, even experimenting with long exposures for dramatic effect. When I got the photos back, that shadow was there again. This time it stood at the end of the bridge, much closer to the lens. Its outline was sharper and more defined, a solid, headless figure with no discernible limbs. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I had checked my camera carefully. There were no issues with the lens or exposure, and I distinctly remembered being completely alone during the shoot. I even asked the photo lab owner if there could have been any errors during processing, but he just looked at me blankly and said, "The film is fine." From that point on, the shadow appeared in every shoot. Sometimes it lingered in the background like a solitary figure amidst ruins. Other times it loomed alarmingly close, right in the center of the frame, as if staring directly at me. Once I photographed a set of railway tracks. In the picture, the shadow stood directly on the rails, unmistakably human-like, seemingly moving toward me. I couldn't sleep at night. I felt like I was being watched. I started hearing faint footsteps outside my bedroom door in the middle of the night, but whenever I opened it, there was no one there. The shadow had become a nightmare, relentless and inescapable. The shadow first appeared at the brick factory. Maybe the answer was there. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to go back. This time I packed 2 rolls of film, a flashlight, and a small folding knife. Not that I thought it would help, but holding it gave me a false sense of security. The factory was even more desolate than before. The collapsed kiln gaped like a giant black void, and the air reeked of damp decay. I swallowed my fear and walked to the center of the site. Setting up my camera, I began taking photos. By the 4th shot, I heard it, a faint crunching sound, like footsteps on broken bricks. My heart pounded as I spun around, but the flashlight revealed nothing. Moments later, I glanced at my camera's viewfinder. My hands shook. The shadow had returned. This time, it was standing just 5 meters away, its form sharper than ever. I felt an icy wave of terror as I realized It looked exactly like me. Memories surged back, vivid and unstoppable. The first time I came to the brick factory, I had heard a loud crash. That was the kiln collapsing. I hadn't moved fast enough. A massive brick struck the back of my head. I remembered the sharp pain, and then nothing. I had died that day. The shadow wasn't a stranger. It was me, a restless soul trapped in the place where I had perished. All those photos I thought I was taking, they weren't of the world around me. They were traces of my wandering spirit. Since that realization, I've stayed here, unable or unwilling to move on. 30 years have passed. The brick factory has been replaced by a bustling residential complex. I watch the people coming and going, their laughter and conversations a faint echo of the life I once had. Sometimes I appear in their photos. I wonder if they notice me. Some do, their faces twisting in fear. Others see nothing at all. It doesn't matter anymore. I've become a part of this place, a familiar stranger, lingering in the shadows.